I was 9 months pregnant, sitting on the cold concrete outside my own front door, crying so hard I could barely breathe, when the police car pulled up and everything changed. My suitcase was beside me, my phone was at 2%, and inside the house, my husband and his mother were laughing like they had just won something. Like throwing me out, hours before I could go into labor, was some kind of victory. I remember one of the officers stepping out, looking at me, then at the house, confused. He asked me what happened, and I tried to explain through tears, but my voice kept breaking. Then he asked me one simple question, one question that made me stop crying instantly. "Ma'am, do you live here?" I looked up at him, wiped my face, and for the first time that night, I smiled. Because that question? That was the moment everything flipped. What they thought was the end for me, was actually the beginning of the worst mistake they had ever made. And they had no idea yet just how bad it was about to get. My name is Ava, I'm 28, and up until that night, I genuinely believed my marriage was just going through a rough phase, not collapsing right in front of me. I had been with my husband, Daniel, for 4 years, married for 2, and pregnant with our first baby, a little girl we had planned together, or at least I thought we had. Things started changing slowly after I moved into the house with him and his mother. She was always controlling, always critical, but Daniel used to defend me. Then one day, he just stopped. Every comment she made about me being lazy or not good enough went unanswered. Every argument somehow turned into my fault. And when I got pregnant, instead of things getting better, they got worse. She started treating me like I was a problem they needed to solve before the baby arrived. I kept telling myself it was stress, hormones, anything to avoid facing the truth. But deep down, I felt it, that shift. Like I was no longer a wife in that house. Just someone they were waiting to get rid of. I just didn't know how far they were willing to go until that night. It didn't happen all at once, it never does. It started with small things, things that were easy to ignore if you wanted to keep the peace badly enough. Comments about how tired I always looked, even though I was working remotely up until my 8th month. Little remarks about how I wasn't keeping up with the house, even though my doctor had already warned me to avoid overexertion. And Daniel, he just let it happen. At first, he'd squeeze my hand under the table or give me that look like, just ignore her, but eventually, even that stopped. It was like he was slowly choosing a side without ever saying it out loud. His mother, Carol, noticed it too, and she took full advantage. She started making decisions about the house without including me. Rearranging furniture in the nursery I had spent weeks planning. Donating some of my clothes because they were taking up space. One afternoon, I came home from a prenatal appointment and found my hospital bag, something I had carefully packed for weeks, completely unpacked and repacked the right way, according to her. That was the first time I felt something break inside me, but I still stayed quiet. I told myself I needed stability for the baby. That this wasn't the time to create conflict. Looking back now, I realized that silence was exactly what gave them permission to keep pushing. By the time I hit 9 months, I barely recognized my own life. Daniel had stopped coming to appointments. He worked late, ate dinner with his mom, and treated me like a roommate he barely tolerated. And Carol? She stopped pretending altogether. One night at dinner, she looked directly at my stomach and said, "I just hope that baby doesn't turn out as weak as you." Daniel didn't say a word. Not one. I remember sitting there, fork in my hand, realizing that I wasn't safe in that house anymore, not emotionally, not mentally. And definitely not physically if things escalated. But I had nowhere else to go, and they knew it. Or at least, they thought they did. Because what they didn't know was that months before I ever moved in, before the wedding, before any of this started, I had made a decision, one that I never told Daniel or his family about. It wasn't because I didn't trust him back then, it was just something my father insisted on, something he said would protect me no matter what. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. I had no idea that decision would be the only thing standing between me and complete disaster. And the night everything finally exploded, that hidden truth was the only reason I didn't lose everything. The night everything finally snapped didn't start as anything dramatic. It was quiet, almost too quiet, like the kind of calm that makes your stomach uneasy without knowing why. Daniel came home earlier than usual, didn't say hello, didn't ask how I was, just walked straight past me like I wasn't there. Carol was already in the kitchen, whispering something to him, and the second I stepped closer, they both went silent. That should have been my sign. I asked if everything was okay, trying to keep my voice steady, but Carol turned to me with this cold smile and said, "Actually, we need to talk." The way she said it, it wasn't a conversation. It was a decision that had already been made. I sat down slowly, one hand on my stomach as the baby shifted, like even she could feel something was wrong. Daniel didn't sit next to me, he stood behind his mother, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact again. That's when she started. She said the house was too stressful with me there, that my condition was making things harder for everyone, and that it would be better if I left just for a while, she said, like she was doing me a favor. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to shut it down, to laugh it off, to say this was insane, but he didn't. He just nodded. Nodded. Like I was the problem. Like his pregnant wife being in her own home was some kind of inconvenience. I felt my chest tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm and asked where exactly they expected me to go at 9 months pregnant. Carol shrugged and said, "I'm sure you'll figure something out. You always do." That's when I realized, this wasn't temporary. This wasn't stress. They wanted me gone. Completely. I told them no. I said I wasn't leaving, not like this, not without a real conversation, not when I had nowhere safe to go. And that's when everything escalated. Carol stood up so fast her chair scraped across the floor, pointed at me, and said, "You don't get to say no in this house." Before I could even process it, she walked past me, grabbed my suitcase from the closet, and started throwing my things into it, clothes, shoes, even personal items I hadn't touched in weeks. I looked at Daniel again, my voice shaking now, asking him to stop her, to say something, anything, but he just stood there. Watching. Like it had nothing to do with him. That hurt more than anything she said or did. Within minutes, my life was reduced to a half-packed suitcase sitting by the front door. Carol opened it, stepped aside, and told me to leave. Just like that. No discussion. No hesitation. And when I didn't move fast enough, she walked over, grabbed my arm, and pulled me toward the door, ignoring the fact that I could barely keep my balance. I remember the fear hitting me then, not just emotional, but physical. I could have fallen. Something could have happened to the baby. And they didn't care. That was the moment I stopped seeing them as family, and started seeing them for exactly what they were. By the time the door slammed behind me, the reality of what had just happened hadn't fully sunk in yet. I was too focused on staying upright, on breathing through the panic, on the sharp, uncomfortable pressure in my lower back that made me wonder if stress alone could trigger labor. I lowered myself onto the concrete step, one hand gripping my suitcase, the other wrapped protectively around my stomach, trying to calm both myself and the baby at the same time. Inside, I could still hear them moving around, talking like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just been thrown out hours before giving birth. That's when the tears finally came, silent at first, then uncontrollable. I wasn't just crying because I was hurt. I was crying because I finally understood how completely alone they thought I was. Minutes passed, maybe longer, I honestly couldn't tell, before headlights flashed across the driveway and a police car slowly pulled up in front of the house. For a split second, I thought they had called them on me, like I was the one causing trouble, like they were trying to make it official. My heart started racing again as one of the officers stepped out, his expression shifting the moment he saw me sitting there in that condition. He asked if I was okay, and I tried to explain, but my voice was shaking too much to make sense. Then came the question that changed everything. "Ma'am, do you live here?" I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I suddenly realized what that question meant. I looked at him, wiped my face, and said, very clearly, yes. I do. He nodded slowly, then asked if anyone inside had asked me to leave. I let out a small, almost disbelieving laugh and said, they didn't ask. That was all he needed. The second officer walked up to the door and knocked firmly, and within seconds, Carol opened it with that same confident expression she always had, until she saw who was standing there. She immediately switched her tone, acting polite, controlled, like she was completely in charge of the situation. She told them I was having a moment and that I had chosen to step outside. I watched from the steps as she tried to twist the story, tried to make me look unstable, emotional, dramatic, anything but the truth. But then the officer asked her a simple follow-up question. Ma'am, whose house is this? And for the first time that night, she hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because before she could answer, I slowly stood up, reached into my bag, and pulled out a folded document I had kept hidden for months. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My voice wasn't breaking. I walked up to them, handed it to the officer, and said, actually, I think this answers that. And as he unfolded the paper and began reading, I saw something I had never seen before in Carol's eyes. Not anger. Not control. Fear. The moment the officer finished reading the document, everything shifted in a way that felt almost unreal. He looked from the paper to me, then slowly turned toward Carol and Daniel, his entire demeanor changing from neutral to firm. Ma'am, he said, holding the document up slightly, this property is legally owned by her. The silence that followed was deafening. Carol's face drained of color, her mouth opening like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words fast enough. Daniel finally stepped forward, grabbing the paper from the officer's hand, scanning it like he expected it to magically change if he looked hard enough. But it didn't. Because it was real. Months before we got married, my father had insisted I purchase the house in my name only. He had helped me with the down payment as a gift, but made sure everything, from the deed to the mortgage, was legally tied to me. I never hid it with bad intentions. At the time, it just didn't feel necessary to bring it up. Daniel handled most of the visible finances, and I let him believe we were building everything together. But legally? This house was mine. Always had been. And now, that truth was standing right in front of them, impossible to ignore. Carol tried to recover quickly, her voice suddenly sharp again as she claimed there must be some mistake, that Daniel paid for everything, that I was lying. The officer didn't argue, he simply pointed out that legal ownership wasn't based on assumptions or opinions, it was based on documented fact. Then he asked a question that flipped the entire situation on its head. Ma'am, are you requesting that they leave the property? For a second, I just stood there, taking it all in. The same doorway I had been dragged out of, the same people who treated me like I had no place there, now waiting for my decision. I looked at Daniel, really looked at him, and saw nothing but panic and regret. But it was too late for that. Slowly, I nodded. Yes, I said, my voice calm, steady. I am. Carol immediately started protesting, raising her voice, insisting they had rights, that this was their home too, but the officers weren't listening anymore. They gave them clear instructions, gather their things and leave peacefully, or it would escalate further. And just like that, the power they thought they had over me disappeared. Completely. I stepped back onto the porch as they moved around inside, no longer in control, no longer laughing, no longer untouchable. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel helpless. I felt in control. And as I stood there, one hand on my stomach, feeling my daughter move again, I realized something else too. They didn't just underestimate me, they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Watching them pack their things that night felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life where justice actually showed up exactly when it was supposed to. Carol didn't say another word to me, she couldn't. Every bit of control she thought she had was gone, replaced by quiet panic as she rushed Daniel to gather whatever they could carry. And Daniel, he tried once. He walked up to me, eyes soft, voice low, like he could somehow undo everything with a few words. But I didn't let him speak. Because there was nothing left to say. Less than a week later, I gave birth to my daughter in that same house, peacefully, safely, surrounded by people who actually cared about me. I changed the locks, filed for divorce, and never looked back. The house they tried to throw me out of became the place I rebuilt my life, stronger and smarter than before. And the truth is, karma didn't just hit them, it exposed them. So if you've ever been made to feel powerless in your own life, remember this: sometimes the moment they think they've won is exactly when they lose everything. And if you stayed till the end, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because stories like this, they deserve to be heard.